everyone should just know the health risks, especially women, where the risks for breast cancer and other types of cancers are elevated so very much. And what was interesting to me about the response to that episode is that I think many people took it, the impression I got was that many people took it as permission to finally stop drinking or drink less because they didn't enjoy drinking. And as you beautifully put out on social media, drinking is one of the few activities that if you don't partake, people assume or accuse you of having a problem. And it's just wild. I mean, like, why would that be? And I think it also once actually I was out to dinner with a colleague years ago and I declined drinking that evening. I was just talking to the visiting speaker and she said, God, that's so boring. And I thought, well, first of all, I don't have a problem saying what's on my mind without alcohol, right? I don't have a excessive GABAergic inhibition. So I'll say what I want to say, as best I can. But, I think drinkers don't like people who don't drink because it takes the fun out of it for them. Because there's this idea that's, prolific on college campuses. Like if everyone's drunk, that somehow like the entire vibe of the party is going to take on a new flavor. And frankly, I remember I went to a college, UC Santa Barbara, where at the time people drank a ton. It discovered alcoholics, right? And I used to go to parties sometimes. I'd look around, I'm thinking like everyone here is just blasted. Like if anything happened. Were
you drinking? Did you drink in college?
Yeah, I drank in college, but not that often. I had a habit, and I don't recommend this. I had a habit of going out about once a month, and I would tie one on. Absolutely.
Infrequent, but binge.
Yeah, I never, my tolerance to alcohol was always such that I would get drunk quickly and then sober up really fast. So I was drinking late into the night, but then I'd sober up really fast. Now, of course, we know the sleep you get after even one drink is vastly diminished.
Every single person that's got an aura or a whoop strap or something is feeling you right now.
And I think that alcohol to me never felt good. I never liked it. And it was a recipe for, there was a lot of fights. There was a lot of, there were a lot of bad stuff happens when people are drinking too much.
I've run
drunk driving, to say nothing of poor decision making. Yeah. I mean, to me, it just feels like there's so many better ways to have a good time that alcohol isn't necessary. But I do understand that it's a big part of many cultures. And I do understand that for many people, it's so part and parcel with relaxing and with festivities and with feeling comfortable and with drawing a boundary between the normal day and the rest of the day.
That's interesting. There's a ritualistic aspect to it.
Yeah, there's this sort of, it divides the day in an interesting way. So I'm not judgmental of it. But for me, I mean, I'll go to a party where people are drinking and just hang out. I'm perfectly good.
Dude, I've stood on the door of 1,000 club nights in my career, right, as a club promoter. And I can promise you, for the people that are thinking, I like the sound of this justification, this excuse that I don't need to drink anymore. Dr. Huberman has said that, maybe it's not for you. Maybe it's not as enjoyable. Nothing good happens in nightclubs after 1 a.m. I am patient zero. I am the doctor of late night parties. Okay. Like that's one of my expertise. Nothing good happens in a nightclub. It's this sort of messy, sloppy fights and kissing people you shouldn't and stumbling all over the place and stuff. If you go out and you don't drink and you go home at 1 a.m, I think you probably get to capture about 80% of the enjoyment of the event that you would have done had you have drank, pre-drinks, gone out, done the whole thing. And I got quite a bit of pushback from a sobriety community a few years ago. I did this 1,000 days sober as a club promoter, which was, I guess, like a kind of a big deal in some regards for like pushing the sobriety community forward. But I was never doing it because I had a problem. I was doing it because it gave me more consistency and more time and more money to spend on things that I cared about. So it was a productivity tool, like the Pomodoro technique, right? Or going to bed on time or something. And they had a little bit of a problem. They had a big problem with the fact that I said, there is something to the enjoyment of drinking on a night out. I think anybody that says alcohol has no role in improving the quality of a night out ever just hasn't been on enough good nights out, right? There are ways that it can improve, kind of loosens people up. It can reduce their inhibitions. If you want to go and dance, you're dancing at a rave or at a festival, which I think there's one going on quite close to here. If you're there, it's really great. But if alcohol wasn't so widely distributed, I think people would ask a lot more questions. It's like you can't see the wood for the trees, right? You don't question it. It's baked into the fabric of just human life. Every single time that I take a macro dose but low of psilocybin, one where I can still function.
What is
0.75 to 1 gram.
So that's about, it's a little less than half of the macro therapeutic dose for intractable depression, which is something like 2.2 grams or so.
So you can still hold a conversation depending on what strain you've got. But every single time that I do it, without fail, a thought comes into my mind, which is, why does anyone drink alcohol? Why does anybody do it? Because I'll go to bed, my HRV, my recovery's fine. The next day, maybe I'm a little bit tired. Like I've had a lot of activation. I've been super energetic. Very little hangover. On the evening, I don't do stupid things. It makes me want to say nice things to all of my friends. My thoughts are sharper than they were before. Sometimes they're silly, but they're sharper. And then you compare it with alcohol, and it's this kind of sloppy, muddy, very unagile. It's just, I totally get what you mean. When you've taken a little bit of time away from it and you look at it in the harsh light of day, the effect that alcohol gives you just aren't that enjoyable. And it's been folded into people's lives through tradition and through just anchoring bias and continuation.
Yeah, and marketing. You know, the idea that like someone can quote unquote hold their liquor is such like it's been made synonymous with, you know, masculine ideals. It's like, I mean, it's kind of crazy because we know it also crushes testosterone levels. What's interesting is that, you know, I forget who said this, but, you know, there's a very different picture of a young drunk versus an old drunk. You know, someone who's been just drinking for too many years, it's not a pretty picture.
It's sad.
They become infantile. They become really infantile. And, you know, again, I'm not the anti-alcohol crusader. I did that episode not expecting much of a response, actually. But that shows just how out of touch sometimes I can be.
I think, just to reiterate it, man, I think it gave people the excuse. What you did was you gave people the justification. You legitimized them. It's like the best books tell you something that you already know. It was like lots of people always had an idea. I probably shouldn't be drinking. Maybe I don't enjoy it that much. Maybe these aren't my friends. They're just my drinking partners. Maybe I don't like the way that I feel the next day. Maybe my life could be better if I stopped drinking. There's the justification.
Well, I'm happy to hear that for those folks, you know, now that the information is out there. I was accused several times on Twitter/X of taking all the fun out of parties at least in the Bay Area. But I'll tell you, I grew up in the Bay Area. The good parties ended a long time ago. But they still exist. You know, I mean, I think they're, you know, and when I say other ways to have fun, I don't mean like, oh, everyone should sit around and do math or read neuroscience, although for me that's fun. You know, I think in a broader sense, I think there's a shift nowadays that people really think about, you know, how to engage socially in ways that are interesting. I mean, perhaps it's again a sampling bias because of the topics that I cover and who talks to me. But you know, like in the Bay Area, there are these Russian banyas. In New York, there's Spy 88. By the way, they don't pay me to say this, but I like to go to this Russian banya down in Wall Street. You go there and, you know, got hot saunas and cold plunge, and people are, you know, young people are there enjoying themselves, and they actually serve alcohol. So sometimes they'll do like little gimlets of vodka or something there. And so, you know, people sometimes that's part of the tradition.
The most Russian thing that I can think of: shot of vodka whilst hot.
Right. So that, and you know, and they've got theories as to how that can help. And listen, I think some of those traditions can really be wonderful. But you know, people are starting to combine socializing with health promoting protocols, and you know, going out and eating good food together, like eating really wonderful food, with the social component. We should be very concerned. So when it comes to smoking or vaping, there's the thing that's being consumed, the thing that people are trying to put in their bloodstream, nicotine, cannabis, et cetera. And let's just set those aside. I've done episodes on nicotine and cannabis, and they have their application. They also have their problems. Vaping is terrible because of the other chemicals that it delivers to the lungs. It's also very clear, and we haven't released this episode yet, but I talked to a female hormone doc from Austin, Natalie Crawford, so OBGYN. You know, vaping is associated with disruptions in egg health, and what they call egg quality can create certain mutations in eggs, and serious endocrine issues in women. Okay. Personally, I find it disgusting. Like, I just find it like, I don't do it, but when I see people vaping, like, to me, and listen, I used to, when growing up, I quit smoking a long time ago, but I used to smoke a bit of nicotine growing up. Remember, I was a wild one, but that's not why I did it. Nicotine works for me as a drug, and I don't do it anymore. But vaping is so addictive. It's a mutagen. It mutates the genes of cells. It mutates the genes of rapidly dividing cells most. So breast cancers, ovarian cancers, egg quality, sperm are constantly turning over. So, people always say, no, well, I vape all the time and I got so-and-so pregnant or whatever. When let's say I have a perfectly healthy kid, that kid might've been much healthier. And also the kid's not grown up yet. Like, introduce me to the kid later. I wish for that kid. I pray for them, but that they're healthy as can be. But it is so clear that you're introducing a laundry list of toxins to the lungs, and they're getting into the bloodstream, and there are a number of them that cross the blood-brain barrier. And once they cross the blood-brain barrier, those neurons, by virtue of the fact that neurons don't turn over across the lifespan, you're born with the ones that you're going to die with. You might add a few across your lifespan, but you're mostly born with the ones that you're going to die with. Well, they're going to harbor those chemicals and those particulates. And yes, we have grandparents that smoked and lived to be 90, but those are generally the outliers. So I can't find one good reason why people should vape. If people want nicotine in their system that badly, and here I'm not recommending that, they would be much better off relying on a troche or a patch.
Yep. Because or whatever.
Or even toothpicks or injectable. I know people, I'm not going to out anyone.
Inject nicotine.
Oh, I'm not going to out anyone here, but I know people in our podcast community that rely on nicotine injections for mental clarity.
That is so hardcore.
Yeah, I don't. It causes elevation in blood pressure. It causes vasoconstriction, but it also will robustly increase focus and attention, as any smoker will tell you.
Mainlining nicotine.
Yeah, you're starting to see some companies that offer things like NAD infusions also offer subcutaneous or nicotine injections.
Going back to
patch or gum. Yeah,
smoking for a very long time. Everyone knows. Huge campaign, which I think was pretty effective, actually, at kind of discouraging people from smoking, or at least making them aware about the...
Do you remember how they got kids to stop smoking? They told them for years it was bad for their health. That didn't work. They told them that it was putting money in the pockets of these these old cackling white guys that were like rubbing their hands in the boardroom and making a ton of money, and then it became the rebellious thing to quit smoking. That was the effective campaign.
So I think about this all the time, that there was a big push to both disincentivize and make more difficult smoking. You got to go outside. There's the smoking area. Mm-hmm. I remember I worked in clubs for 1 year before the smoking ban came in the UK, and then people had to go outside. Just friction all the way down, and then vaping came in. And vaping is way more enjoyable of an experience than smoking ever was. You can have a higher dose of nicotine that tastes, enjoyable, bubblegum flavor and raspberry unicorn dust and whatever. I don't know. And it's not going to stink the house out. You don't have any of the externalities of that. So I wonder whether we have ended up in a net benefit or net cost for public health from switching from smoking to vaping.
Yeah, there's an analog here with, kratom and opioids.
Dude.
If you really want to, we just got to put ourselves under attack by even bringing up the topic, but I did it intentionally. There are things like smoking and opioid addiction, it's unequivocal. It's just terrible, right? It crushes lives, destroys lives. Yes, there are those rare individuals who smoked their whole life, lived into their 90s, and okay, but they are outliers. So the question is vaping allowing fewer people to smoke and therefore improving their health? Maybe, if they're hell-bent on getting that nicotine or cannabis into their system and they're opting not to smoke and they're going to vape instead, then maybe we have to be objective and say, okay, if they are absolutely intent on getting it in through some inhalation device, vaping is probably better, but we don't know that for sure. We actually don't know that. And then since I brought it up, and I really put the target on myself with this one, I did a post about kratom, which is over the counter. People will say it's not an opioid. It taps the opioid system. It taps other systems as well. And a number of people have indeed managed to get themselves off of opioids using kratom as a bit of a bridge, kind of like the methadone heroin thing. But the kratom advocacy groups are really growing strong right now because there is the possibility that kratom will be made illegal in the not too distant future. And there is the reality that some people who were never opioid addicts have taken kratom and then get addicted to kratom. And then people start arguing, is it real addiction? Is it habit forming, et cetera? So I think the next year or so is going to be an interesting time for dialogue about kratom. I have a couple of guests coming on my podcast. Maybe you'll do it as well. And I'd love that if you would. There's one thing, by the way, folks, that's so great about the podcast space, unlike other professions. We love it when one topic or one guest shows up on multiple podcasts because it actually doesn't hurt any of us.
And sent me, in the last few months, you sent me Paul Conti, you've sent me Rick Rubin. And everyone's got a different flex, right? The conversation you're going to have with Rick or Paul is going to be way different to the one that I'm going to have, which is going to be way different to the one that Joe's going to have.
Yeah, it's a very different thing than academic science, than journalism of other kinds.
Zero sum.
The idea, it's a no scoop. They, like in academia or in journalism, they say, oh, who got the scoop? Or you got scooped, someone else put it out first. And, in podcasting, it's quite the opposite. So I think the kratom the kratom topics can be really interesting and important to cover. But I think, look, my vote is to not vape. I think I'm just shocked at how many people vape. And first of all, it's actually not unlike cigarette smoking. It's expensive. That's not the main reason people avoid it, but it's a significant expense when you add it up across the year. It's clearly addictive. There's no question about it. It's clearly detrimental to lung function. And then people like how it makes their brain feel. And they think that if they're already pretty active, physically active, then they can offset some of that, and they probably can. But I think in the next 5 years or so, we're just going to see a slew of studies showing that vaping is just bad for us, especially for the developing brain, because it's bringing in at a very rapid rate high potency nicotine and high potency cannabis. And from Mona Lemke's work, and we know my colleague at Stanford, that the slope of that increase in dopamine and epinephrine, adrenaline, and acetylcholine is so important. The sharper that slope, the faster the rise, the more addictive potential these compounds have. And so it's so far and away different than the kind of dopamine or epinephrine or acetylcholine increase that one sees with exercise or with cold plunges or with sex or with these other things, or dancing and things, So, and, one, of course, could be addicted to any of the other things I just mentioned too, but the potential for it is far less than something like vaping.